I finally finished Donkey Kong Bananza almost 6 months later. In my opinion, this is the Nintendo Switch 2's flagship game. Yes, there's Mario Kart World, and probably realistically that'll sell more, but this is the definitive you need a Switch 2 game. It's everything great about Nintendo in a fantastic 3D Donkey Kong game. Mario Kart is more like their party game. You'll probably always come back to it and play it here and there, but it doesn't give you that full single-player experience and magic that Nintendo's AAA single-player games give you. Let's first talk about some of the silly things. What I like about the Switch is I can still get physical media for it. And with Nintendo exclusive games, you know the game is actually on the cartridge instead of being a game key card or just a download. I gotta say, I really like the red. Red is my favorite color of the case. I think the Switch 2 logo is a little weird. It's a little bit too tall. It takes up too much of the cover. But if we're just judging just the cover art for Donkey Kong Bananza itself, it is incredible. It looks so good with the red and yellow and just Donkey Kong punching. It's just a wonderful design. It's very epic and it looks very cool. And it gives you the style of what kind of game it's going for. What's really cool here too, what I like about these Switch games, it's a little bit more of a problem with Switch 2 games because they're a translucent red instead of clear. They have a really beautiful inside cover art. Extremely high quality and it looks fantastic. It's just a nice little thing you get if you get the physical edition. I really like that. Unfortunately, we don't get game manuals anymore, but I like having the physical cartridge and the art in it. I think it looks really nice. If we keep going with the trend of how does this game look? Now let's get to the actual game. I think it looks fantastic. There's so many opportunities where the game just shines really well. It's very Nintendo stylized art style, not like obviously not going for a realistic look, but I think its art style holds up really well. It is definitely a continuation of Mario Odyssey and other Nintendo Switch era games, but the Switch 2 really lets this shine with lighting and with quality and with resolution and frame rate. Now, to be fair, from my understanding, it actually doesn't run at the highest resolution or frame rate, but think about how bad it would have been on their original Switch. I find the visuals, the graphics are pretty good, and the resolution, I think it goes between 1080p and 1200p, with some light upscaling of some sort, not DLSS, something a little simpler than that, like FSR. It can be a little pixelated or crunchy at times, but I would say it is not a huge issue unless you're really close. Playing the Switch on a monitor, maybe the pixelization comes up a little bit more, but using it as a console at home, it looks fine on a big TV. Definitely a lot better than most Nintendo Switch games, and you know, this is a Switch 2 game, so it better be. I think one of the huge benefits of this generation for Nintendo is HDR. I really do think Nintendo's art styles shine really well with HDR because Nintendo is very colorful. They're very bright, very vibrant, very well at using color palettes. They're not going for a gritty, realistic look, and I think this game is absolutely gorgeous. With my OLED TV, it looks so good. The brights pop, the blacks are really dark and nice and full. There's just good contrast and great color. I really like the way they implemented HDR with this game. I think it worked out pretty well. In terms of performance, I would say 90% of the time it is a perfect 60 and there's nothing to complain about. But every time there's something big and exciting going on, you get too much gold blowing up or like a boss has too many physics going on, it can drop pretty low. I think it goes to 30, but it might even be lower. But I would say it's not a deal breaker, it's just unfortunate that it happens. It definitely can hurt certain parts of the game, but generally when you need to be timing things, it's not too big of a deal. I would say the biggest issue is probably those boss battles where it does drop pretty aggressively, especially towards the end as more and more stuff is happening in the boss battles. But most of the game runs at a 60 FPS. I'm not trying to excuse it. It is unfortunate that basically the Switch's launch AAA game is kind of not performing where it should be, kind of just like Breath of the Wild was. At least our standard is higher and we're at closer to 60 instead of 30 FPS. In terms of audio and music, I think Nintendo games have a little bit of a weird like balancing when they use surround sound. It just doesn't seem like they use the rear channels that often or use the subwoofer that much. But overall, it sounds pretty good. The music is very Nintendo, but it's not like orchestral. You know, it's not gonna like, it's not the most cinematic or epic music in the world. It's kind of just like serviceable fun, mostly upbeat with some, you know, quieter, calmer moments as well. I would say it's serviceable. I don't know how much of it's super memorable, except, you know, like the intro and a couple places like the Divide. I really like that somber music. It's just really cool. But I would say most of the music is kind of just background music. It's not really anything super special. It's not like Nintendo's like cinematic moments of music and audio design. But it is definitely, it's more than serviceable. It's really quite good. It's just not top tier. All right, now that we're done with like the technical details of the silly stuff, how is the actual game? How's the gameplay? I would say this is an extraordinarily satisfying game. You might look at it and be like, I don't know if this is for me. You know, you don't want to play like a Minecraft Nintendo game or whatever. But I would argue it is very satisfying. I don't know how much I cared about the destruction before I started playing the game, but it gets more and more satisfying the more you explore and more you use it. And because it's a Nintendo 3D platformer, you don't have to dig all the time. Most of the time the digging is very obvious, or where there's secrets, yeah, you can go dig around more, but there's cues and then there's limitations to the digging as well. But it is very satisfying with the rumble effect. It's feels very good with an original Switch Pro controller or a Switch 2 Pro controller. I've tried it with both, and they both feel pretty good with it. The new controller is a little bit better, but don't feel like you're missing out by not having the Pro controller, the new, really expensive one, because it still is a good experience with just basic rumble as well. The game gives you a lot of haptic feedback as well as, you know, camera shake and stuff to make you feel like you're actually punching something, there's actually something tactile there. Maybe a couple things I could criticize are it's kind of slightly repetitive, kind of the same issue with Mario Odyssey, is there is just so many bananas and collectibles and stuff that over time, playing it for more than like an hour to 2 hours at a time, it kind of gets repetitive and kind of stops being as interesting as it should be. Just because it kind of gets a little bit samey, especially because every world has a couple of repeats of hide and seek and like platforming sections and that sort of thing. Maybe it's just the time I played it, but it's not like, you know, it's not a super heavy story game either, so it doesn't keep you captivated the whole time. But it's definitely satisfying when you play it. And once you start getting that itch of exploration and wanting to explore the worlds in and out, then it becomes very, very satisfying and very captivating to keep playing. There was just sometimes, some days where I just kind of was bored of it after like an hour or so. Because, you know, you kind of just do the same thing. You collect bananas and you explore around, and eventually it becomes repetitive once your brain gets going about like, oh, what's over here, what's over here. It definitely gives you similar feeling to a Mario or even kind of like a Zelda game in terms of exploration. Like each world is just so interesting to explore. And there's a lot of rewards, so it kind of keeps your ADHD going. Doesn't let you sit around too much. And I will say, overall, it is actually a pretty easy game. Every enemy is like pretty easy. I did die a couple times, but they were kind of like, you know, blame yourself, not the game. It's kind of in the same vein of a Mario 3D game, and those 3D games tend to be a little easier than their 2D games anyway. And it's nowhere near as easy as Kirby or anything, but it's kind of simple once you get a hang of it. But that's not necessarily a negative, but you can do a bunch of crazy tricks and stuff with all the movesets Donkey Kong has, as well as all the abilities you get throughout the game. I don't think I got that deep into it. I didn't play it all the way to have everything it ever offers, but I did get probably 75% of the bananas, and I obviously did all the layers to, beat the game. I think I put about 30 hours into it, and I had a great time with it. I will say, something that was weird is the final boss was very, very hard for me. I don't know why. Once I got the hang of it, once I looked up some tips and tricks, you kind of got into a rhythm, but it's weird because, like I said, most of the game is pretty easy, and most of the enemies and bosses you can beat in like less than a minute. The final boss just ramps up difficulty to 11, and probably not 11, I probably just suck at games. But it just feels weirdly different from the rest of the game, considering how relatively easy the rest of the game is. Even the platforming is pretty easy. It's not that frustrating. Most of the stuff is fairly easy to figure out. Most of the puzzles aren't too hard. And overall, it's mostly a breeze of a game, but the final boss just beat me up for some reason. I died so many times. I spent like probably almost an hour and a half to 2 hours on it, and it really only should take like 10 to 20 minutes. But I think other people had that issue when I was looking online as well. Overall, what do we think? I love this game. I think this is the flagship Nintendo game so far because, I got Pokemon and Metroid that are technically available on Switch 1 anyway, and Mario Kart World. There will be more games, but this one arguably is more interesting than Mario Kart World in terms of why get a Switch 2. If you love Nintendo games, if you love, adventuring and exploring and finding collectibles and that sort of thing, you'll love this. If you love Mario Odyssey, Mario Galaxy, this is right up your alley. Honestly, even it gave me a little bit of Zelda connection, I guess, just with the exploring and trying to look everywhere. Kind of gives you that satisfaction of an adventure, right? It's a very big game. I was actually pretty surprised. I was about halfway through and I was surprised how much more I still had to do. It's not the longest game in the world by any means. Like I said, I did it in 30 hours, and you could probably do it much quicker, but it is totally worth it. But I do personally have a problem with $70 games. I think that's just too much considering how many other games go on sale. If you think you're interested in this and you've been willing to spend $70, $60 on other Nintendo games or AAA games, this is definitely an incredible one, and if anything's worth that much, this is definitely up there. I give it a 9 out of 10 because hardly any game is perfect, and obviously I did have some quibbles with it. The one that immediately comes to mind that's an issue is we should not be dropping frame rates on a game that just came out on a new system. We should have fixed that. We should have optimized it or cut something to make it run a little bit better. Use some dynamic particles or resolution or whatever you need to do to make sure those 30 FPS things don't happen, because that's a little ridiculous in your new console. But other than that, this game's incredible, and 98% of the time it doesn't break playability. Donkey Kong Bananza. Highly recommended.